What is going on, everybody? We are back for another episode of the Average Fan Podcast. We have a whole lot to talk about. Lots of winning for Hartford Athletic. Really good start to the season for them, whether it be in Open Cup play or in league play. But I am once again joined by Oliver Scholes down in New Jersey. We are recording this post game after the Open Cup game. Oliver, how's it feel to be in New Jersey, and how is it to get to watch Hartford Athletic beat up on a USL League Two team?
Well, I'll say it feels a lot better to be here than it did to be in Lewiston, Maine last year when Hartford lost. And I was stuck in Lewis. I mean, and I will say, like, the Portland Hearts of Pine fans last year were great. Sean and Sean Fecto from the Blazing Musket and I went out for a beer after the game. So I wasn't like super sad, but I was also in like Lewiston, Maine, and like the team had lost. And I had to go back to my hotel room and write a really depressing game recap. I'm in Newark, which I don't know, maybe a coin flip whether that's preferable to Lewiston, Maine. Um, but they won quite comfortably in the end. Some things we could talk about in that game that might give fans a little cause for concern. It is USL2 side. On the other hand, the USL2 side just kicked the absolute living shit out of Portland last night. So maybe it's good. Maybe this is a sign that Hartford's going in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, you got to miss out on a lovely tailgate that the Green Mountain Boys put on. I think I had some nice corned beef pregame. So that was very lovely. Besides it being absolutely freezing and just not being able to generate any sort of heat. But definitely a lot to talk about. So let's get started kind of talking on this US Open Cup game. Obviously, Hartford was able to get the win. Now moving on to the next round, I believe 2-0 win over FC Motown. Had a lot of new faces, lots of fresh faces in the starting 11. Anthony Saha was a player who got a break, but you also did have some veterans in the likes of Jordan Scarlett getting the start. Since you were there, Oliver, what kind of stood out, from the stands in terms of how Hartford was able to perform?
Yeah, I think given that they brought in four players who weren't officially with the team until last night or this morning, although obviously, these guys have been in training, right? It's not like they just picked them up off the street. Um, and in addition to those four guys, they also, as you mentioned, did not start Anthony Siaha. Enzo Carvalho got the starting goal. You had TJ Prestis, who obviously played a lot of minutes last year, but has been on, consigned to the bench so far, in 2026. They put Andres Hernandez and Christos Hatzipaskalis out there, two guys who do not have a lot of minutes. I think Hatzipaskalis had not appeared yet for Hartford. Hernandez had a couple of substitute appearances. I think he came on in the Birmingham game. So pretty heavily rotated, and heavily rotated not in the sense of, just putting in the reserves, but you had two guys on short-term contracts and two academy players out there, which on the one hand, they went out there and they got the win. They won 2-0. They move on to the next round, and that's good. But watching them, it's an indication. It's not like these guys are all ready to play at a championship level, right? They didn't, wipe the floor with FC Motown. I thought, uh, particularly through the midfield, Hartford were a little soft through parts of the game. They were surprisingly kind of out physicaled by Motown at various moments. They weren't really able to dominate the game. There were times where it looked like FC Motown had the beating of them for pace too, particularly some of those guys, Canada, Laura, who, maybe not expected to make significant contributions over the course of the season, but were called on tonight. So, they won. I think it was fairly comfortable, although there were some moments for concern. There were actually, I think, two occasions where Hartford had to clear the ball off the line, which is not, great when you're playing against an amateur side that's not in the middle of their season, that they're getting those kinds of opportunities. But on the other side, there were times where Hartford, really got down the sides and they got the ball into the area and they just couldn't quite find the right last pass. Junior Mira, missed by about 6 inches late that would have, kind of sealed things. There were some other opportunities throughout the second half in particular where, on another night, maybe they put four of them in the back of the net, and it looks a lot more comfortable. So I think by and large, given who was out there and given that, Jordan Scarlett and Barry Coffey and then, In the second half, some of the guys who came on, Adrian Diz, Beverly Makangila, Junior Morera, those are really the only guys who played or who are probably going to be expected to put in significant minutes over the course of the season. Um, I don't know. I thought it was fine. I would have liked them to get to kind of put it away a little bit earlier. Get a couple of goals in the first half and really put it out of sight. I think Brendan Burke probably would have liked that too, but they did what they set out to do. They did it without really having to play a lot of the guys who are going to have to play on Saturday against Brooklyn. So they were able to keep everyone or as many people as fresh as they absolutely possibly could. And the guys who played the heavy minutes are guys who, quite frankly, are some of whom are not going to be with the club for the duration of the season because they're on 25-day contracts, and others of whom are on academy contracts and are not expected to see the field in significant minutes in league play. So, on balance, it is what it is for this kind of stage of the competition.
Yeah, and it is really interesting when you go up against these USL Elite Two sides. Don't have a lot of time to train, obviously, because they are kind of a summer team. Usually they have a few days to train, especially depending on who they were able to get in terms of roster wise. And it is very interesting, depending on the type of players you're able to get. You do have these kind of thresh college bodies, if you will. So maybe they're able to beat you on the pace, or maybe beat you in terms of strength. But just the fact that Vermont, Hartford was able to get the win, is definitely important. I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts, Oliver, on the likes of Coffee, maybe some of those guys who are kind of brought in, maybe a little bit more senior compared to guys on 25-day contracts and academy contracts. I guess what stood out about their play, and even if you want to go back to just the start of the season in general, how have the kind of new guys been able to fit in?
Yeah, I mean, I think Barry Coffey is the one who's got the most minutes so far, particularly with Samuel Cariaga not really being available. So I think he has shown some really good things, but he's also shown that he's not fully adjusted to the league yet, and that's not surprising, right? This is a guy who's played basically his entire professional career in Ireland, primarily in the League of Ireland second tier. Every league is different. I think the championship is probably a big step up from where he's been playing. And I think also there's also the adjustment to the approach, the tactical approach of Brendan Burke, which is very, very high energy, requires the players to be very precise. After the game tonight, Brendan Burke was talking about how some of those new guys, Coffee, he talked about Hernandez, Andres Hernandez as well. Good performances in some ways, but also wants to see the spacing improve. Wants to see the distancing. Wants to see them settle in a little bit more into the structure of the team. We talked a little bit after the game. In the second half, Andres Hernandez was much further forward. You saw him in the box on a couple of occasions, leading the attack, almost playing as a second striker in a lot of ways from a midfield position. And Brendan Burke was very happy with that. Was very happy to see that adjustment from the player to move further up the pitch and get in the place that this team wants him to be in, wants a player like that to be in. Um, so I think you saw some of those adjustments happening during the game. But I think if you look back over the three games that Hartford has played so far, you see that those new guys have not really, those new guys without championship experience have not really fully adjusted yet. And that's not surprising, both given big step up, I think, for some of them in terms of the level of the competition. And also Hartford did not really have a particularly full preseason from everything we've heard. They did not get the number of training sessions in that they really wanted. They didn't take a full training trip to go to Florida or something like that, like they might have in previous seasons. Um, and so I think given all of that, things look just about okay. And they've got 4 points in the league so far, and they've kept 2 clean sheets there, 3 clean sheets now in all competitions. So it's hard to be too concerned about it. But I do think when you're talking about Barry Coffey in particular, it doesn't really look like he's fully settled. He came in with a reputation as a goal scorer. He had a really great free kick in the Birmingham game that required a really good save from the Birmingham keeper. But outside of that, he hasn't really shown a lot in and around the box in terms of that kind of production. And that maybe is something that your fans are going to want to see, and I think Brendan Burke is going to want to see pretty soon if it's going to be the case that he's really working out.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting. The article that you put out with Brendan Burke, kind of talking about the Open Cup, talking how it can be a little bit of fool's gold, a mixed bag, if you will. Just looking to add that trophy to the cabinet and kind of the effects it can have on a team. Would love to kind of get your thoughts as Hartford has advanced. Just how do you think they'll approach this tournament? Do you think even as the tournament progresses, could continue to see more academy guys and 25-day contract guys get some significant playing time? Or do you feel, if Hartford is able to go deeper into the tournament, that you could see Brendan Burke start to maybe put more of a full strength lineup compared to, what you're seeing against the USL League Two side?
I think it'll depend on a couple of things. One, I think it will just depend on the health of his team. One of the things we've seen is there's just guys with injuries right now. Babacar and Jai is a guy who probably would have played tonight, but he's still not 100% from an injury he had at the end of last season. Cariaga, Michi and Galina, those are guys who were available in Jacksonville, but have been held out since because they picked up knocks in that game and are not quite ready to go yet. And there's other guys on the roster who appear to be in similar situations, right? Also, Emmanuel Samadia is still not even in the country yet, right? He's still dealing with a visa issue that's kept him unavailable. So I think the first thing that's gonna depend, or that approach is going to depend on, is just simply who's available. Who does Brendan Burke have to pick from? And if it's a little thin, we might see kind of a, well, we've we've moved on. But we're not going to stretch ourselves. The second thing I think is it might depend who the opposition is. Who are they playing? If they get to the next round and they get, let's say they get Rhode Island, I can see that being a game that the team wants to win, right? They don't want to lose to RIFC, and that might influence the decision in a different way. But realistically, this next game they're going to play is going to be a midweek game. They have a game the Saturday before. They have a game the Saturday after. Given where the roster is, I would imagine in the second round we will probably see something very similar. Maybe it's soon enough that some of these guys who are on 25-day contracts will still be with the club and would be, I think, likely to play again. The academy guys, I think, would be likely to play again. We may see some other roster moves. I think Brendan Burke is still looking to add to the squad in a more substantive way beyond those short-term fixes and academy fixes. So I think there may be some other some irons in the fire to bring in a couple more players that would give him some more options. But I think it'll depend who's available, and it'll depend who the opposition is, and it will depend kind of. I think if, let's say, Hartford wins in Brooklyn and beats Indy and is in a really good position, that might feel like a, what, let's take a shot at it. We've banked some points here. We're in a good position in the league. We're not sacrificing anything. But on the other hand, if it feels like they're really starting to scuffle, I think it might be we need to really just give our best effort in the cup, but not really overstretch ourselves, because that was the point I think that Brendan Burke was making when he and I spoke the other day about the cup. Was like, look, in the MLS era, there have been like 3 non-MLS teams that have made the final, right? Obviously, Rochester won the whole thing in 1999, incredible. But since then, Charleston Battery in 2008 and Sacramento Republic in 2022 are the only non-MLS teams to even get a sniff at the final. And that's not atypical, right? Like, if you look around the world, like second tier clubs don't go to the final of the major domestic cup competition very often. But it does, I think, mean that if you try to make a deep run in that competition as a USL club, you're going to put a lot more minutes on your guys, expose them to injury, all the things that go along with that. And the likelihood is you're just going to lose in the quarterfinal or something like that. And you're not really going to have anything to show for it other than we went to the quarterfinals of the cup competition. And so I do think there will be much more focus here on the league and on the USL Cup. Obviously, that's a competition that they prioritized last year and they won. So I think we'll see that again. And the US Open Cup may depend a little bit on who's actually available.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of wrapping up the US Open Cup coverage, is US Soccer going to actually do the thing and have RIFC and Hartford Athletic play yet another game against each other? Could we see Vermont Green either make the trip down to Hartford or potentially, Hartford go up to Burlington? It sounds like, I think it was a League One updater, Alex Ashton was talking about it, or it might have also been, US Open Cup, the US Open Cup guys, US Open Cup News, I believe. They do a fantastic job covering the tournament. That basically said like it isn't technically like regionalized anymore, so we tend potentially could see, maybe some new little teams. Who do you think Hartford will end up playing in the next round?
I mean, they say it's not regionalized, but like when the rubber meets the road, are you really going to tell Vermont Green they've got to fly to Texas or something like that? Like, absolutely not, right? They'll say no, right? So there's that reality. And if there are other clubs in the mix, I think Asheville City is another USL team that won tonight. There might be others in the mix by Thursday. Um, I think there's a realism that comes too, right? Like, you're talking about a midweek game. A lot of these clubs are going to be playing the weekend before and the weekend after, and the regionalization of it in the United States makes it possible. So I think it's highly likely. I would imagine that there might be an inclination to keep Hartford and Rhode Island apart, at least for one more round. I would say Vermont Green. I think Westchester from League One is still to play tomorrow, and if they win that game, or I think they're also playing another New York club. I forget the name of the club they're playing. So that the winner of that game could be the other one that I think would be in the mix. I mean, it's going to be regionalized for the most part because you just can't ask these clubs to do that kind of travel on short notice.
Definitely, definitely. And now that we can put the US Open Cup in the rearview mirror, let's take a step back and look at, how Hartford's been able to perform, in the league. They started off the season with, I would say, a pretty great performance against SC Jacks, 3-0 victory, and then had the lovely midweek field trip special match against Birmingham Legion. That was a 0-0 game. Legion ended up getting a red card. I think, like Brennan Burke kind of said, those midweek games, especially playing a game at like the middle of the day, definitely can cause some issues and maybe be more of a toss up than it should be. But overall, I guess, what stood out about those two matches? What were maybe some kind of threads you were able to see between the two games, and what players stood out with their performances?
Yeah, well, you look at the Jacksonville game, and that was a game where when the whistle blew, it was a very, very satisfactory performance for Hartford Athletic. That was everything they were doing was kind of very much in line with what they were doing when they were successful last summer. It wasn't perfect, right? There were holes in it, absolutely. It took them, 45, 50 minutes to really kind of lock that in over the course of the game. Um, but it was exactly the way they were playing. They were not trying to possess the ball. And then once they got the ball, they were turning it upfield and getting it into dangerous positions very, very quickly. Like their average completed pass was something like 12 vertical yards up the field, which was like 2 yards further than any other team that played that weekend. That was exactly what they wanted to be doing. Um, and then the Birmingham game, it wasn't quite as good. Now defensively, it was more than passable, right? They did not, really get dominated by Birmingham in the attack. But they really struggled to get into dangerous positions. And I think that really went down to the fact that Michi and Galina was not there. If you compare the performance of Augustine Williams in the two games, he was so isolated in Birmingham. There was nobody to connect him. And Adewale Obalola is not a player who has yet shown that he can be that connector or he can shift the center of gravity on the field in a way that frees up his running mate up at the front there. And the way that Nglina has shown over and over and over again that when he's on the pitch, he makes everybody else a little bit better because of what he can do and because he just pulls the gravity of the defense toward him. So I think we saw in those two games an indication of why Michi is so important to this team because when he was on the pitch, he turned the game around. He, picked up the assist for the second goal because he was the guy who, pulled the defense towards him, and he had the right ball to cut it back. He also probably should have had the assist for the first goal too. I think he did get a touch on it on that first one, but he was the guy who was in the box causing havoc, and two defenders and the goalkeeper were taken out of the play because they were focused on Michi and Galina, and Augustine Williams just had to basically roll the ball into the back of the net. And then he's not there in Birmingham because he picked up a little bit of a knock, and they're being very cautious with his health, and it just didn't look like the same team. And the other player, Samuel Carriaga came on for like 20 minutes in Jacksonville, and he just looked like he was ready to be Hartford's number 10 for the next 5 years and be a top player in the league. Like that cameo was just, he was making the right runs. He was in the box. He was part of the press. He was everything that you want him to be doing. And I was like, oh man, if he's ready to go at full strength next week, this is going to be so good. And then he picks up a knock as well. And so Harvard doesn't have him either. And so they're missing two guys who might realistically be their two best players. And when you throw in Emmanuel Samadia as well, they're missing like three of their best players, maybe the three, you know, best players they have on the roster right now. And that is brutal. And it means that someone like Augustine Williams is just so isolated up top. There's just nobody to help connect him. There's nobody to provide him service. His heat map in Birmingham, he was like in the no man's land between the top of the box and the halfway mark. And when that's where your center forward is like picking up the ball all the time, it's just not good things.
Definitely, definitely. One more player I want to touch on, is Matt Real. Just overall, what has been your kind of thoughts on how he's been able to perform? And I think, someone who has MLS experience, has experience with Brendan Burke, seems like maybe the expectations, might be a little bit higher than, maybe your typical newcomer coming into the team. Just overall, what are your thoughts on how he's been able to perform this year?
Yeah, well, Jacksonville, he was great. He was man of the match. He made the team of the week. He didn't put a foot wrong defensively. I mean, literally didn't put a foot wrong. No mistakes defensively, which was incredible. Maybe not quite as far forward as you'd really like in Brendan Burke's system. If you think about where Sebastian Anderson or Emmanuel Samadia often are from those fullback positions, he was maybe a little bit deeper than you'd like. But what's to complain about in that game? Birmingham, again, he felt like he just didn't quite have it at the same level in that game. And I think part of that is that because he doesn't have that same kind of attacking dynamism, he doesn't bring anything that shifts the field, right? The way that Samadio or Anderson might, or other, you think about other really talented fullbacks. So if he's off a little bit defensively, he's not adding a ton of value on the pitch. And I think that's kind of the reality with Real is that his ceiling is that his ceiling is team of the week, clearly. Like he can be that good, but he's not going to be a game changer on a regular basis. Now, you got to have those guys who are solid and above solid and can give you a really good performance. And frankly, this team is going to need him if Samadia is not going to be available until sometime in April and Babakur Njai is not going to be available for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, who knows. They absolutely desperately need Matt Real to be out there and playing minutes. And the good thing is that you absolutely have confidence that he can go out there and he can play minutes and he's going to look like he belongs. He's not, Barry Coffey or someone who we're still hoping that he kind of beds in and adjusts to the league. So I thought the Jacksonville performance was stellar. The Birmingham performance maybe a little bit less so. And I think that's kind of, the thing with Matt Real is maybe a little bit inconsistent too.
Definitely, definitely. And I mean, now looking ahead to the kind of upcoming matches that we're going to touch on, Brooklyn FC and Indy 11. But more recent match, the next match will be Brooklyn FC. And I mean, a really interesting squad. I think, lots of familiar names in terms of, former Hartford players as well as former Rhode Island FC players. You have one of the top goal scorers, I believe, in USL League One last year, if I'm correct, in Obregon Jr. playing up top for them. You also have some names familiar to Revs fans, the legendary Tommy McNamara, and also for other reasons. And I mean, I feel bad for the poor guy because like he's actually a pretty decent, good soccer player, Peter Mangione. So will be very interesting to see how they perform. I've had a decent start to this season. Would love to get your thoughts, Oliver, just on what are your expectations for this match against Brooklyn FC. By the way, I believe playing in Coney Park in a baseball field.
Yeah, they're playing at Maimonides Park on Coney Island, which is a baseball stadium. You can actually see, I watched their game against Indy 11 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And it's literally right there. You can see the roller coaster like looming over the park, which is actually kind of incredible. If it was an actual soccer stadium, it would be a great place to play, but it's not. It's a baseball stadium, right? Um, Brooklyn is, I don't know about Brooklyn. I think they are, um, they won their home opener, right? They beat Indy 11. They got Juan Carlos Obregon scored a penalty in that game. Indy probably deserved something out of that game. I don't know. I think they had the better of the play, and they just couldn't quite find a way to pull the trigger, right, when all was said and done. And that might ultimately end up being more of a reflection on Indy 11 than it is on Brooklyn, because Brooklyn turned around, and in their second game, they got hammered by Detroit. And I don't know, I mean, I admit that I didn't spend a lot of time grinding tape on Detroit in the offseason, but I don't get the feeling that a lot of people who follow the USL are like, oh, Detroit, they're title contenders, right? Like they're a borderline playoff team, and a got good squad. Like I don't want to be dismissive of them. So I think I don't know. I think Brooklyn is a team that needs time to come together. It doesn't feel like they had a particularly effective offseason. They were signing players very late in the day. I mean, this, as a Hartford fan, I know from this, right? We've seen this over the years, right? You're signing guys right up to the deadline, who, and they've been in training camp again. It's not like these are guys who were just kind of kicking a ball in the park a few weeks ago. Um, but it just feels like they weren't quite all pulled together for the season until very, very late. And, Juan Carlos Obregon is a guy who we saw him in Hartford. He had 15 goals in Hartford in 2 seasons. He was good enough without ever looking like he was a world beater in the championship. And then he went down to League One and he dominated. He absolutely dominated season in Charlotte, season with a terrible Westchester team where he was basically the only reason to watch Westchester last season. Um, and he was great for both of those clubs as a goal scorer. Is that something he's going to be able to continue to do for Brooklyn? I don't know. He's never really done that before in the championship. But he is a guy who, he'll score 10 goals maybe, and that might be good enough for Brooklyn. So looking at this game, I think the bigger question for me is Hartford healthy enough to take on a championship team? Like they can't put some of these guys out there, like Jack Laura, and some of these guys will get eaten alive by championship level talent because they just aren't at that level right now. And that doesn't mean that they might not be able to stick around with the club and play in some Oakland Cup games and be useful guys in training and so on. And not they might develop. Who knows, right? Given them, if you get them in the right situation. But if Hartford has to play any of those guys, who played tonight, Laura, Flynn, Canada, that could get really, really dicey. So the big tell here is going to be Hartford's health and Hartford's ability to put out a fully professional squad that is at least some way echoing what Brandenburg was hoping to do this season. If they can't, this could be a really difficult fixture because as much as I do have doubts about Brooklyn over the course of the season, they are at least full of professional players. And I think if Hartford is not at even 50% strength, that they are missing really key pieces again. Mishin Galina, Samuel Carriaga, if those are guys who can't play, if anybody else is missing, it could be really, really difficult for Hartford.
Yeah, and I'd love to get your thoughts on just overall the just run of away games that the team's having to play. And you talked about that atmosphere at Brooklyn FC Stadium. I watched a video that Zealand put out, and it seems like hell of a good time. Probably maybe a little too long of concession lines, but they were giving out free hot dogs, so can't really complain there. But and overall too, just obviously when it comes to playing soccer in a baseball stadium, there can be lots of complaints, especially I think when you look at something like a Yankee Stadium. How do you feel the setup will be? Do you feel Hartford will kind of be feeling tight on the field, and could Brooklyn have a little bit of a home field advantage there?
I think it is the case that if you're playing in a weird stadium like that, you can get a home field advantage, right? Because you get to see it more often and you maybe get to train there and, you have these other advantages and teams come in and they're used to playing on, in a soccer stadium, right? Whatever the faults of Dillon Stadium are, it is a soccer specific stadium. So I think there can be that advantage for the home team. I think more than anything, some of these places are just really terrible places to play. You look at and this is one Protective Stadium where Birmingham plays is another one, right? It's 40 seats, 47,000 people. They don't have 47,000 people showing up to play. Their like record last year was Education Day where they had like 5,100 people show up. And that's a great number if your stadium seats 5,500 people. It's not a great number in a 47K stadium. And I think we see that with the baseball stadiums too. We've seen it with New Mexico United in the past as well at Isotopes Park, where it's just not a really great place to see a soccer game, even if the product on the field is good. So I think with Brooklyn playing at Maimonides Park, I don't know. I'm not going to be able to go down. I know there's a bus of fans going down, which I think is great for Hartford. I just feel like it's not going to be a great experience from a watching soccer perspective, even if there are free hot dogs, which I admit does make everything better.
Exactly, exactly. And now looking ahead to the Indy 11 game, we were talking kind of earlier. Seems like Indy 11 might be struggling so far this season. Um, Also, I think it'll be a welcome respite for Hartford fans in terms of it being the home opener. What are your expectations for that game? And, when you talk about, Brooklyn looking to put it together, in the 11 potentially not getting off to a great start, it really seems like there's lots of points on the table for Hartford and they could potentially, really get off to a good start this season.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about Indy 11 because they're a club that has been around for a quite a long time now, right, in this league, and they've never really quite been able to put it together, right? They've been through a number of different head coaches. They've just never really broken through and been, or certainly not in recent memory, really broken through and felt like, yeah, this team is a contender. And it's not totally clear why. They've had good players there. They have good players now. It's not like it's a squad of scrubs, right? They have guys who've made a name in this league and have been good. So I think the thing with Indy is it just never feels like they have a real identity. It never really feels like you're fully sure what they're trying to do, and you hear this from their fans kind of year in and year out that it's just sort of we don't. They're out there kicking the ball around, and maybe they're making the playoffs, but they're not. There's not really this clear identity being established as to what the club is and what the club is trying to do. Like Hartford, for example, that was certainly the case. When Tab Ramos was the coach, like who knew what they were trying to do out there? And under Brendan Burke, like even when it's not working, you know exactly what the goal is. You know exactly what the identity of the club is, exactly what the identity of the team is. And Indy 11 just doesn't seem to have that. Now, maybe they will this year. Maybe they'll pull it together. But they just feel like a side that is not, just isn't it's not clear what they're trying to do. And I think some of that comes from a sense of confusion in the front office, right? This is a club that has kind of like pursued, oh, are we gonna try and bring MLS to Indy? Is that gonna be us? Is that gonna be somebody else and we're gonna go out of business? Or what's gonna happen here, right? That's been going on over the last couple of years. It's not really clear at this point what actually is going to happen. And I think that has ultimately impacted some of the decisions that have been made about roster building, about how the team has been put together, and it's never good to have that kind of chaos lurking in the background, especially when it then is impacting the resources that the manager might have to put the team together or, other things like that. So I don't know. Indy did not look great against Brooklyn, although as I said, I think they probably deserve something from that game. They did win their Open Cup game. They beat Des Moines Menace 3-0. Um, I think Hartford being at home, first home game of the season, hopefully it will be decent weather. Hopefully Hartford will be a bit healthier. I think it's a game that's well set up for Hartford. Now, again, much like I've said a couple of times already, if Hartford is still struggling with injuries and they don't have players available, you're talking about, let's say Michi and Galena is still unavailable. Samuel Carriaga, Emmanuel Samadia will definitely not be in that game, right? Like, again, that might be really scratching for Hartford. They're not going to look their best. So I think you look at these two games, Brooklyn and Indy, 100% great opportunity for Hartford to pick up another 6 points. Hit the end of the month on 10 points and a victory in the U.S. Open Cup. That's an incredible opener to the season, particularly after what we suffered through last year. But these are not going to be easy games, more so because of where Hartford is in terms of their roster health and in terms of who's available than because the opposition is particularly good. So if they don't get points here in these games, that's bad news, right? Because these are winnable games. If they get points here despite being depleted, that's excellent news because they've banked the points and they're only going to get better when these guys are available down.
Definitely, definitely. And I mean, it seems like, at least kind of looking over the roster, Indy obviously has Eric Dick, probably one of the better goalkeepers in the USL Championship, and obviously Anthony Saha on the Hartford side. I guess, do you think it could be the most important aspect of the game might be, who's up top? Could it be Augie Williams having to kind of really, put in work and being able to sneak one by Eric Dick? Or do you think it will kind of come down to whether it's overall health or just the performance of the back lines to see who can kind of scrape by and get a goal?
Yeah, I think one thing that we can say about Hartford so far is that their defense has been fine, right? They've gone with back three, Jordan Scarlett, Artur Diz, and Britton Fisher, the Loney, as their back three, and they played Matt Rial and Sebastian Anderson on the wings, and that's been a great setup. They haven't conceded a goal yet, right? Brendan Burke pointed out, they've only given up 2 shots on target in each of their league games. Like that's a recipe for success, right? If you're not letting the opposition get those opportunities. So I think for Hartford, in both of these games, if that back line is available and those guys are playing in that combination, they will feel very confident that they're not going to get the doors blown off them. And that if they can get a goal, they'll be in a great place to take something out of the game. The difficulty I really do think is going to be going forward. It's going to be getting a goal. So I think for Hartford, if they can sneak a goal, something long over the top, Augustine Williams can thrive in that sort of situation. We haven't seen a ton from Sadat Anaku yet. He's a player who has a reputation for being a speedster, and that is something I think Brendan Burke has been holding a little bit in reserve. We might see him off the bench. Certainly, I think he might be in line for a start in the next couple of games just because of availability. But he's a guy where, like if he's as fast as everybody says he is, then that's a great opportunity for you to get that ball vertically to him and for him to find the back of the net in a counterattacking situation or transition situation. So I do think Hartford will feel much more confident that they'll, keep the score low, right? They'll potentially keep another clean sheet in each of these games. But finding a goal could be difficult. I mean, I don't really want to get 2 more 0-0 draws in our next couple of games here, but I think probably given what player availability looks like at the moment, that might be good enough.
Definitely. Before we wrap up, Oliver, we have to do our quick segment, the lightning round. Connecticut United having their home venues sorted out, I believe. Again, they have played games. They now have a home stadium. Everything's coming up Connecticut United.
Yeah, so Connecticut United, they played 2 more times, I think, since we last talked, right? They lost to Chattanooga, who are another independent club, and they beat Philadelphia Union 2 after Union 2 went down to 10 men. I think that's right. Um, and I don't think I saw anything in either of those games that changed my opinion about MLS Next Pro, which is if you are coming in as an independent side, your competition is the other independent sides. You should beat up on the kids all day long. Yeah, okay, they're talented kids. They're going to beat you sometimes, right? Like that's soccer. But you should be winning those games. And then when you go out and play against other adults, it gets a little bit more difficult. For example, Chattanooga. Oh, I don't know. I think with Connecticut United on the pitch, uh, I know it's about as good as you could hope for. Off the pitch, I don't know. I think I said on the round table, I pitched the idea that they would be like a literal Rovers, right? They would go everywhere. Wanderers, right? Played 17 home games in 17 different stadiums. So I'm kind of in favor of this model where they're going to play at Reese Stadium at Yale. They're going to play at, I think it's Maroney Field at UConn.
Mhm.
And then a TBD, which I think might be possibly Fairfield or Bridgeport, somewhere like that. One of those universities down in the kind of southwestern corner of the state, to give them a third venue for some of their later games. And they're playing these games in bunches. I think it looks like they're going to play a bunch of games at UConn and then a bunch of games at Yale or vice versa, and then they've got some TBD games later in the season. And I don't know. I think that's it's a good model, right? You're trying to build interest in this team. We don't know where their permanent home is going to be if they ever find it, and so it's not bad to put yourself in front of a bunch of different fans. I'm going to really try to get down to one of the games at UConn just to see what the turnout is like because I'm very, very curious to see what they manage to do. Um, I don't even know what to expect. I would fully uh, believe any outcome from like 10 people in the stadium to they give away like thousands of free tickets and they pack the place, right? Like either one of those could happen. And I don't know which one is really worse actually when it comes down to it. I think having the stadium full is probably better, even if they're not committed fans. Um, but I don't know. I'm still not convinced about that part of it. Like on the field, sure, right? They've been able to figure out that if you sign decent players, you can do well in MLS Next Pro. Awesome. Off the field, I just don't know, man. I just still doesn't feel like this is an avenue to success. I can't imagine that they're going to be able to play at either of those venues long term that they've announced. That just doesn't seem sustainable. They need to find something that is going to work out for them, and there's just not a lot of options around the state of Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who has been lucky enough to attend a Revolution 2 game. If they were able to get 1,000 people, that would be amazing. I would say if they were able to get 200 people, that would be the biggest W they could ever have. Definitely it'll be interesting to see what the turnout looks like. You know, Oliver, I do want to ask you, since we are coming up on the home opener, what is your favorite part about attending a home game at, getting to see Hartford Athletic live in the flesh at home? What's your favorite thing, whether it's just being in the stadium or just the environment? Just what is your favorite aspect of a home game day?
It's the fans, for sure. It's the fans. I think whether it's in the tailgate out in the parking lot beforehand, or you're just talking with people in the stands. I usually get in the stadium a little bit early, grab a beer, sit and talk to some folks for a while before the game. And I just love talking to people who give a shit about soccer. It's not like, you know, I can't get enough of it in my life. I love talking about how the team's doing. I love talking about how individual players are performing. And then when the game starts, I just love being around people who are there to enjoy themselves and support the team. When there's not very many people there and there's no singing and there's no drumming and there's none of that, it's really depressing. You know, I got I I've been to a couple of Hartford Athletic home games over the years where the weather was bad and there was really, really nobody there. And it was just really, really brutal. It was just not a good time to be in the stadium. And even even when the weather is bad, if there are people there, it's incredible. So a couple like I think it was 2019 when Trinity Health Stadium opened, the lights weren't ready when the stadium opened. So they had a bunch of day games in like July and August before the lights went up. So there was like 110 degrees or something insane like that, right? And the club had brought in like water trucks so that people could get water during the game and doing the hydration breaks. And like everybody was like singing and they're making we got a song about hydration breaks and all this stuff going on, right? And like that is an incredible atmosphere. Even though the weather sucked and nobody wanted to be standing around in like the burning sun. Or I think 2021 there was a game that was like lightning delayed against Loudon, and it was like pouring rain, and mostly everybody went home, and there were probably like 50 people left in the stadium. And Hartford came back and they won that game, and all the fans were like behind the goal. It was just an incredible atmosphere, right? And so it's the fans, it's the people that make the experience, wherever that is, if it's before the game, if it's during the game, if it's hanging out after the game. I want to be there with the people, and that's why I'm very skeptical about Connecticut United because that's ultimately what makes it. It's not, it's the people who are in the stadium, it's the fans who support the club. It's the fans who cheer, even the fans who are not vocal, right? If I walk around, I talk to people who sit in other sections who are not there because they like to stand and cheer for 90 minutes. But they're just as passionate and they're just as an important part of the puzzle for a club, and I love every part of that.
Yeah, I mean, free water, that is a foreign concept for the lovely Portland Hearts of Pine fans. So they'll be very jealous of, even an experience of having that. Kudos to all the folks over at Hartford Athletic for simply providing free water when it's necessary. But, really appreciate it, Oliver. Some great insights, to help our average fans kind of get a sense of how the team's performing so far this season. Before we go, know if you got anything in the pipeline you want to plug. Like I said, you had a great article kind of previewing this Open Cup matchup. But if there's anything you have in store, any final thoughts you want to give, let's hear it.
Yeah, well, two things. One, about a week or 10 days ago, I finally got published a piece on Brendan Burke that I had been kind of wrestling with in the off season and didn't ever quite get finished. But it's out there, and I really encourage people to read it. Brendan's a really interesting guy to talk to. His path as a manager has been a little atypical. He's not. He said, you don't dream of being the guy who gets called in when the club sucks to turn it around. Like that's not what managers fantasize about. But he's done it in Colorado Springs. They were garbage when he got there, and he turned that around. He went to be a part of the project in Houston, and that team was garbage. And he was a part of a team that won the U.S. Open Cup, and by all accounts was hugely influential in that part of their run. And he came to Hartford, which obviously was absolute dumpster fire garbage when he got here. and they've won silverware. Like, if you had said in 2023, don't worry, guys, 2 years from now, we're going to be lifting a trophy, nobody would have believed you. Um, so he has, I think, come to accept that part of who he is as a manager or who he's been, even if maybe there's a hope for something more in the future as well. So I really encourage people to read that because I think it's a really good insight into Burke and what makes him tick and what he's brought to Hartford Athletic. I will have some more thoughts on the Open Cup, about the performance from Hartford, and also about the Open Cup in general, coming probably tomorrow. I'll try to crank that out before I leave New Jersey, and then the normal, previews and recaps of the upcoming games as well.
Yeah, and before we go, I will just say, obviously, the USLPAA kind of labor negotiations are still going on. Seemed like it was going to reach a fever pitch kind of before the start of the season. As these first couple games have been played, but as of right now, no strike has been authorized, and kind of seems to be in a holding pattern. So definitely, we'll keep an eye out to see what changes happen there.
I will
Once
say it sounds like there's been a little progress, not a ton. I don't want to get people to get carried away, but I will also just say, like, my opinion, it's time for the league to come to the table and figure this out. Like, the amounts of money we're talking about are not huge at a time when the league is trying to collect millions of dollars in expansion fees. When it's charging the clubs $100,000 a pop as an exploration fee or whatever they're calling it for USLD1, the amount of money they're going to collect in that fee alone would cover the difference of opinion on the remaining items on the bargaining table. So I don't know. My perspective is that it's time for the league to figure this out.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it was Jeff Reader who put out an article, in The Guardian really breaking down, different fees and how these fees are essentially being collected by USL and not really even being distributed to teams. So great point, Oliver. But really appreciate everyone who listens to the podcast. I will give a quick plug to our YouTube page. I think we're closing in on like 300 subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, would really appreciate if you do. You get the video version of the podcast. If you have YouTube podcasts, you can subscribe there. You also have all the other various podcasts, such as Blazing Musket podcast. We also put out kind of some more short form videos. So if you want more Hartford Athletic content, or if you just want more New England soccer content, make sure to check us out there. But if you haven't already, make sure to listen, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And we just really appreciate everyone for listening. I think we'll be back after the Indy 11 game in about 2 weeks' time. So look forward to chatting with you all then. Thank you again for listening. And I really hope that the Lattox do well.